So let me give you some background to why we are proposing changes to the Constitution, again, after changing them last year, and then I'll hand over to Gareth to kind of talk through it more generally. So I think most of you know that there's two primary documents governing the governance of the church. I should say there's the Bible, which is the main one, but there's two legal documents governing how we operate as a church. So that's our church constitution and then our rules or bylaws. Generally, you don't change the constitution often. That remains quite static. And the church rules are then just fleshing out and expressing how those clauses in the constitution are meant to be administered. So last year, this time, it was a big meeting that we had because we were accepting changes to our rules and constitution after so many years of them being in existence. What precipitated the changes last year, just recall, was a major overhaul to the leadership structure of the church. So we had gone through this whole process of a structure review committee and changing the structure and council, elders, deacons, etc. So there was this big leadership structure change, which then had to be encapsulated. And it was mainly in the rules, because the rules actually spell out how the church is governed. It was whole-scale changes to the rules. That was the bulk of the work last year, was really about the rules. The constitution changes last year was just literally to reflect changes to the rules. For example, where there was the word council, that had to be replaced with EGB, etc. In other words, our focus last year was just very much on the rules, and constitution changes were to suit the rules. This year, we kind of thought we were done. And then this year, we received news that due to SARS regulations around tax-exempt organizations like ours, that we needed to add some statements to our founding document. And our founding document is our Constitution. So due to needing to add a whole bunch of clauses around our financial controls, finance guys will talk about this way better than me, we had to go and relook at the Constitution and include these clauses. And I want to say that for the large part, we know and believe that to be just the government taking a good step towards kind of clamping down on some rogue pop-up church that are fronts for other kind of illegal money activities. Okay, so we endorse that, we support that, we embrace that, we sought legal counsel at exactly what that means for our Constitution and got those clauses together and ready. We want to say that that's largely what we need to do, and that's easy. I really think there's very little debate on those. None of the clauses that we have to put in for SARS regulations are changing how we operate as a church or affecting our theology. There's just no impact on us. We just need to do that in order to maintain our tax-exempt status. So that's really all we need to do. However, we thought that now, since we've changed the Constitution maybe twice in 2 years, maybe let's have a look at the Constitution, and if there's anything else to change, let's change it now, because we don't want to keep changing the Constitution every year. And when you step back and look at the Constitution as it is, you'll see that it is a Constitution that has developed over 100 years. And there's just a lot of wording in that Constitution that currently doesn't reflect how we actually operate as a church. Or I shouldn't say that. It gives the different impression as to who we are as a church. And that's just natural because this church is 114 years old. And so Gareth initiated by having a look at the Constitution, really just starting from scratch, rewording it in order to better reflect who we actually are as a church. So let me give you one example of that, which is probably the part of it that, probably has kind of the most discussion, at least in eldership level, has generated the most discussion. And that is around kind of the wording in our Constitution around our association with the Baptist Union. So it's quite interesting. Before coming to Rosebank Union, I was from a Baptist church background. I'd never thought of Rosebank as a Baptist church at all. But if you read the Constitution, current Constitution, 5 of the 13 clauses in the Constitution refer to association with the Baptist Union. For example, there's a whole clause in there about we are known as a union church until such time as the members decide by 80% vote that we will change our name to a Baptist church, which is just really interesting for me. That there is lodged from its roots of this church goes back to even church votes where the senior pastor had to be a Baptist-trained pastor. That was taken out many years ago, but as it stands, I do come from that anyway. But there's curious just phrases around that. For example, if there's a dispute in the church, you call the Baptist Union to mediate that dispute. If the church had to close its doors, which is not something we're doing everything we can to do the opposite of that. All the property of the church cedes to the Baptist Union. So it's just very strong language about our association with that particular denomination, which isn't an accurate representation of who we actually are as a church. So I'll just give 2 quick anecdotes on this. We had our Spring Day service, and I think there was a time, somehow I think I acknowledged that there were charismatics in the congregation at the time, right? And just a shout out to the charismatics, something like that, because there's charismatics in our midst. And one of our staff members just actually made a comment on that. Said it was so refreshing to hear that, since we're a Baptist church, and I'm here, and I'm like, well, what do you mean? So that's not my impression. We had this prayer meeting a couple of weeks ago with other churches in the area, and a lot of our young adults were in attendance, and one of the comments from them was, we were praying in groups and out loud, which is, kind of not normal for a Baptist church. And we were like, well, where does this come from, And listen, Rosebank has a very special affiliation with the Baptist Union. So I was involved, Baptist Union, on executives, all that kind of thing, and never knew Rosebank to be a member church, because it's not. It's not a member of the Baptist Union. It's therefore not a Baptist church, but it has an affiliate status, meaning that its pastors, like myself and Justin and Darba, can be accredited, keep our marriage licenses, commission of oaths, etc. It's a unique relationship that has been negotiated over the years. We've got a letter of Lee, and when they went and negotiated this special arrangement. However, the wording in the Constitution doesn't give that impression. We're not wanting to sever the tie at all. The intention is still to maintain that unique special affiliate status, but you wouldn't know that from reading the Constitution as it is. And so that's just one area where we're looking at going, man, this doesn't seem to be giving the correct impression of who we are as a church. We're an interdenominational church. At the one information session we had about this Constitution changes, the one member's been a member for ages, and was like, tells her friends it's a Baptist church, and she just asked me, what do I tell them? Who is Rosebank? And the answer is an interdenominational church. It's a union church. That's very much our identity as a church. But we do have an affiliate status with a particular denomination, and we have no intention to change that, but to just make the Constitution give a better reflection of that. So that's the idea behind these changes. So just remember, it's 2 levels. 1, SARS stuff, got to do it, keep our tax-exempt status, there's no harm, let's just do that. But then number 2, while we're at it, let's adopt a Constitution that in new members come on board. And let's be honest, the only time people look at a Constitution is when they're new members and they have to look at it and sign that they looked at it. Or maybe they sign and go, I've read the terms and conditions, but they didn't, like we all do. This is not a big deal. Nothing in the changes to the Constitution, and hear me clearly, is motivating towards changing how we operate currently. 0. Even the financial changes. We're already doing everything. The idea is to just change the language to reflect how we are operating. This is not a change of direction in theology, in operation. It's just to better reflect who we are. I'm not going to say it's a huge stumbling block. People don't refuse to be members because of that, So it's not like this hill that we're going to die on. But since we're at it, if we're going to change the Constitution once for the next 50 years, let's us, class of 2022, put together something that better reflects who we are as a church. So that was a bit long, the background to the changes. Gareth, do you want to talk a bit about what those changes are? And just remember, keep voting for elders if you haven't been able to get in.
All right. Thank you very much, Pastor Richard. I think you've done a fantastic job, and I wouldn't have managed to do as well. I think that part of what we're trying to do is, in updating the Constitution, it stood us in good stead for the last 110 years. We want to make it good for the next 100 years at least. So what we've done is clauses 1 to 5 govern the nature of the church as well as the pastors, but firmly anchoring it in the statement of faith. I'm sure you're all familiar with the statement of faith, but it's published on the website, and it's who we are and what we believe. So the Constitution anchors the church in that. I think it's a brave man who would try to change that, or woman. The next clauses, the 6 to 10, the next 5 clauses govern the running of the church, which then defers to the rules which you passed last year, but it encapsulates how we run the church and the fact that it's now an elder-led church. The next clauses, the next 8 clauses, are all to satisfy SARS requirements. And just to sum them up, and I'm building on what Richard said, there have been churches that have started up, collected a lot of money, and then disbanded, and the top guys have run away with the money. And what SARS is doing is making sure that churches that are public benefit organizations like we are have clauses in it that can't happen. No person can get excessive remuneration, for example. And there are all sorts of legal aspects like that SARS want you to include so that the church is governed properly and no individuals are benefiting unreasonably. And then the last 2 clauses just mopping up the governing of the church and how we could change it if we wanted to in the future. But that's a summation of the changes. Now, as I think you know, we've had a couple of information sessions. We plan to have more information sessions. And we really encourage members to come to those sessions so that we can iron out any misunderstandings or disagreements before we vote next March. So we're not asking you to vote tonight. This is the start of a process, but we want the involvement of members. And already we've made 1 or 2 very minor changes, but based on comments that we've received. So we really are encouraging that. You're welcome to write to me, or alternatively, you're welcome to come to the information sessions and to tackle us with anything that you're uncomfortable with. Are there any questions?
What is your name?
I'm Gareth Tudor, and I'm gareth.tudor@icloud.com.